On today's episode, I'm interviewing Lucas Martell, the lead game designer on Walkabout Mini Golf. Before we get into today's episode, I want to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture, made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can head on over to their website, hoffmanswoodstuffs.net, by clicking the link in the description. Let's get into the interview.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hey there, how's it going?
Doing this interview today. How are you doing?
Absolutely. Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. When did you first realize you wanted to work in the video game industry?
I've played around with video games since I was probably even 7 or 8. I know I started coding on a Commodore 64 back in the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there. So I've always played with them, but I don't think I ever realized that it wasn't really a career thing until just recently. I was doing a lot of work in animation, which was also very similar, but also totally and completely different. Video games has kind of been a transition for me. Yeah, compared to animation, you'd think there's a lot more crossover, and they are surprisingly different just in terms of how things get made.
After doing animation, how did you first get into the video game industry?
Well, so I have a small studio in Austin called Mighty Coconut. So we had done one game for the Merge Queue, which was a mobile AR thing, and then did another one called Laser Mazer. Both of those were very small projects that we did. 57 North was a month and a half. It was ridiculously fast. Laser Mazer was more probably 4 or 5 months, and that won a couple of awards like the Jury Prix at Indiecade Europe. And then Walkabout, the one that we've been working on most intensely for the last year and a half here, it kind of grew out of that. So it was a very organic process. It wasn't really planned like that. It just happened to be that this happened at kind of lightning in a bottle, right place, right time. And just with VR sort of growing like it has, and especially with the lockdowns and everything that happened, sort of when they did, a lot of people kind of turned to VR, and especially it's a great way of keeping in touch with people. And so we just kind of happened to be right place, right time with that one. So I'd like to say that there was a larger plan or a larger strategy, but it was just, a lot of making stuff and just kind of being right place, right time.
So how did the first idea for Walkabout Mini Golf originate?
So it actually started off, we had taken the idea from Laser Mazer, which is a game, it's using AR on your phone, but you actually walk around in a very, very large space. We were noticing that a lot of people were reluctant just because you kind of needed a large-ish space. We had a way that you could play it in smaller areas, but a lot of people it was ideal if you went outside, and a lot of people were very self-conscious about doing the things that it was having you do. And so it actually started off as an AR game. We're we could do the same thing, but basically where you putt just by swinging the device like this. And this was pre-Quest. There was some VR games out, but they were all PC based. And so it started as an AR thing, just using that tech. And then once the Quest came out, I quickly ported it over, showed it to Oculus, basically worked on the full VR version of that. We still have the AR version 95% functional. We're just waiting for basically just a little bit of time to totally finish it up and launch it, because it's really cool because you can actually play it on, with 2 people on a phone can play with somebody in VR. So if you only have one VR headset, it's a great way that the whole family or group of people can play, even if you don't have enough headsets for everyone.
How large was the team that worked on Walkabout Mini Golf?
Well, so it was pretty much just me. I did have one other person who did models for the very first course, but it was pretty much a solo project. And then now we've expanded, and now we've got about 12 people working on it. And that kind of started with the DLC, and I guess maybe a course or 2 before then. We've slowly been ramping up over the last year to try to do more courses and more of these DLCs. Yeah, we're about 12 now, and it really does show just sort of we're able to do them much faster. The quality has taken a massive jump over what I could do solo. It all started off we launched with 4 courses, and that was pretty much just a solo effort.
How much research into golf course design and that sort of stuff was needed to be done for Walkabout Mini Golf?
There wasn't a whole lot of, I definitely grew up playing mini golf, and we definitely sort of look at some various different designs, but there wasn't a ton of research, just because I feel like I kind of had my own idea of what I wanted a course to be. There's some really, really awesome real life mini golf courses, but we wanted to capture that, but also go bigger and better with what we were doing with them. So we're able to do a lot of designs that you could never do in real life just because it would either be way too expensive or massive safety issues of people having, shooting their balls off of cliffs and stuff like that. So there was a little bit of looking around, but in general, it was mostly just something that we were able to kind of wing it.
Were there any big or interesting bugs that you and the team came across while working on Walkabout Mini Golf?
Every day. There's always something new. I think probably a lot of it comes from VR is still very much a developing medium, and a lot of the tools that are out there are constantly changing. And there's just so much. It's kind of like building a castle on a swamp. It's just constantly sort of like changing under your feet, and you've got to rebuild sort of like some foundational stuff. There's all sorts of stuff, and I would say like 99% of the bugs come from VR itself. I know we ran into something last year where sort of like people had Christmas lights on and they were like, tracking is not working. Turned out the infrared from the Christmas lights was throwing off the headset tracking. And we saw that again this year, sort of like all of a sudden, like a week after Thanksgiving, we started getting all these bug reports and sort of like, oh, wait, everyone just turned on the Christmas lights. It's better this year, but it's still an issue with certain brands or something. So just VR itself tends to sort of like still be kind of new and kind of getting all the kinks worked out.
What was one interesting idea that ended up getting cut from the game?
Because of how we're doing this, now we're at a point where we're sort of like, we have added so much to the game. Like we launched with 4 courses. There was no smooth locomotion. There was no music. There was no avatars, no flying. We're kind of at a boat where, because it's an ongoing development thing, I wouldn't say that anything has been cut. There are a lot of things that we're hoping to add that are sort of a ways down the road. I know a couple of things, like several people have asked, like, when can we get like a course editor? And that's a good example of something that we would love to do that, especially for mobile VR like Quest. It has to be so heavily optimized. And there is probably a month of work that goes into just getting a design to actually run that you can't really do with sort of an editor. So it's one of those things that we'd like to do it, but the reality is that it's going to be probably a few years before the hardware is even powerful enough to be able to do it. And even then, sort of like how we would actually do it in a way that would work with the engine. So there's a lot of things like that are wish listed. Some of the more difficult ones just kind of get pushed further out.
What was it like working on a video game during the pandemic?
Very isolating. Although I will say it was actually really nice because I was able to send either a couple of quests or a couple of people who already had them were able to get on and play. It was really, really nice, especially once. So the very first person who came on was Henning, who came on to do the fox hunts. I brought him on just like, I've got this idea for the fox hunts. And he had done some of those in real life, and I knew that he would do a great job with those. And then within a month of doing those, he had sort of transitioned over into doing actual courses. And so the nice thing about that is that we hop into VR together. Actually, the whole team now, we will regularly hop into VR, like whenever we've got a new course, and we'll either play it or we'll just walk around and look at stuff. But it's actually kind of like being in the same room, almost like doing a location scout with people kind of in the real world. So in some ways, even though we're a mostly remote team, we actually get a chance to kind of quote unquote see each other in the virtual world quite a bit.
Was there anything that you had to fight for to get put in the game or keep in the game, or maybe something you had to fight for to get removed? Because
we are publishing it ourselves, we don't really have to sort of like, it's up to us. We don't have to sort of appease sort of an investor or something like that. So generally, a lot of times what we run into is more of a performance thing. Like I know there's been a couple of awesome, like we had a really polished version of like some trees that would actually like blow in the wind that actually had more like leaves, like for Gardens of Babylon that came out about a month ago. And it was something that it looked awesome, but it just absolutely like it just would not run without tanking performance. So there's a decent number of things like that we try out, and 99% of the time we're able to find some way to get it to work. Usually we just have to dial it in to find like, okay, here's the little concessions we have to make in order to get it to run on the headset and still be performant. That's really like most of the issues that we've had to either cut or scale back.
What is the process for creating one course?
So it's changed, because when it was me, I would mostly just sort of go in and I would do some sketches and do it. Now that we've got a full team, it's sort of like we're kind of expanding it out. So each course takes probably 6 to 9 months to do, but it's not like the whole team is working on it for that. So we've got 7 courses in active development right now. So typically it starts off with designs, both 2D and 3D. We use Gravity Sketch a lot. It's like VR drawing, VR modeling. It's not necessarily for doing final models, although you can do some stuff with that. It's more for figuring out ideas. And that works so well, especially because a lot of our levels are very vertical in a way that just doesn't work super well in 2D on paper. Although Don Carson, sort of our senior art director, he is an ex-Imagineer. And so he does a lot of stuff even on paper with just red pencil, and then he'll use like a felt tip over the top of it. So he could do some bird's eyes and some detail stuff like that really well, even in a traditional format. Still, though, we like to mix it up. We'll do some stuff in 3D in Gravity Sketches because you can walk around and you can feel like what the point of view is going to be from this specific spot, and then also do designs for each of the holes. Then it moves into more of a gray box where we try to get the gameplay locked down. We also build up our asset library. So we are actually doing all of the course models. We're not doing those like a typical game would, where you would kind of have all your assets and then you would put them together in Unity or Unreal. We do all of that in Blender and some Gravity Sketch as well. So what we have in Blender is basically the final course model. And the reason we do it that way is that it allows us to do a lot of the more nuanced sort of tweaking. So for instance, like the holes, we don't want them to feel like it's tiles or like it's chunks of stuff just sort of put together. We really want to dial in like, oh, we need to move this wall like 6 inches to the left, which is something that you can't really do with, if you're just using straight assets, you need to be able to get in there and sort of like actually move points around. After that, it goes through a couple rounds of play testing. We get it in, we start getting it just generally sort of functional. And then the very last step is lighting, optimization, scene finaling. It's all kind of a big stew of all those final processes that both add the lighting and really make it look, you know, as good as you possibly can. But there's also a pretty large amount of just finding ways of like, oh, can we get this to draw first in order to avoid some technical issues? Can we find a way to cull these objects at a certain distance because the processor just can't handle all of them on screen at one time? There's a lot of that balancing, building to the headset, seeing what works, and then, yeah, sort of like back and forth like that.
Sorry to pop in here, but I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuffs. They specialize in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. They also make custom goods and gifts for any occasion. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can check out their website, hoffmanswoodstuffs.net, by clicking the link in the description. Let's get back into the interview. So you said you used Unity for this. Do you like Unity as a program for making games for VR?
Yeah, I mean, Unity is the main thing being used right now, especially for mobile VR like Quest. It just seems to be set up to handle that. It kind of gives you enough rope to hang yourself with because it really lets you get under the hood and like fine tune little tiny things. Whereas Unreal, I feel like, is probably faster and it's better for larger teams, but Unity just, it lets you be a little closer to the metal, it seems like. And so you can, like, even right now with our physics, we are using Unity's physics, but we are doing a lot of our own stuff on top of that in order to get the ball to work right. And a couple of things that a more general physics engine just doesn't account for. We are able to do some extra polish on top of it. That said, it's kind of one of those things that like a tool is a tool. So there's no reason that you can't do any of this stuff. I mean, Unreal and Unity are the two main ones out there. I don't know of anyone doing much in the way of VR who's not using one of those two packages.
Were there any interesting holes that ended up getting cut from the game?
We always go through sort of a round of designs, and usually there's a couple that get cut just because they don't quite work out, or a lot of times they're either way too difficult or certain ones can kind of become tedious. We found that sort of like if you've ever got a whole design that, and we don't cut as often as we used to. In fact, now we can pretty much draw it out on paper and be like, yep, that'll work, or no, that won't, because we just generally understand sort of what's fun and how the physics works. We did find like, yes, a couple of would kind of get a little tedious. Like if you ever happen to like, oh, I've got to get through this little opening, but I can't just putt straight through it. So I've got to do this little like 3-inch putt just in order to get the ball to the point that I can actually go through that, go across that bridge or something like that. It's not as much fun. So there were a couple of holes like that early on that we're like, lose it.
Were there any parts of the game that you had to put a lot of work and time into to get just the way you wanted it?
Pretty much everything. Yeah, physics. I still keep tweaking physics. In fact, just last night I was dialing in an issue where when the ball was on top of a moving object, like there's a ramp that sort of raises and lowers, and it was fine until we started doing some really big movements, but then suddenly the ball falls to the floor or it doesn't spin when it comes down. So you've got to do some custom physics stuff on top of that in order to make it work right. Lighting, materials, performance, pretty much everything takes a fair bit of work. Even, getting a course to the point that we can play it and it looks pretty good is actually pretty quick. It's all of the polish that goes into it to sand down those rough edges. It takes a long time.
What was the biggest design challenge that you faced while working on Walkabout Mini Golf?
I've already talked a lot about just the rendering and just the difficulty of mobile VR or standalone VR. I think the other technical aspect that that just really does complicate a lot of things is the multiplayer stuff. The fact that you've got so many people coming in from all different places and just generally having a very robust experience around that. I feel like we've reached a point where it's hopefully pretty seamless right now, but to make it that seamless, there's a lot going on kind of under the hood, even to the point where if you get booted out of a game because your headset dies, you can get back in. There's a lot of that sort of stuff under there that hopefully once it's working, people just sort of take it for granted. That's more of a technical thing. I think from a game design, I don't know if it was so much a challenge, but I think that one of the big things that we definitely locked into is this is what we're doing, is that idea that each course is a place and all of the holes connect. And so there's a pretty decent amount of work on every single course that goes into not just the hole designs themselves, but the path that you take through it and how we connect those dots and make it so that that it feels like a real mini golf course in that sense.
What was the process for getting Walkabout Mini Golf onto the platforms it is currently on?
Well, we started off, our very first launch was Oculus. We did both Quest and Rift. And that was something where, because I had been to IndieCade a couple of times and won that one prize, I had met with a couple of the Oculus folks already. And then when I had a new thing coming in, the very first thing that I did, because again, I had the phone version, is that I got it working on the Quest 1. And that was within 3 or 4 months of the Quest 1 launching. And that was at a very, very good time because a lot of people doing VR had not been aiming for hardware that was so low powered. So because we were a mobile game and we were doing AR, we were already heavily optimizing for what a phone can do, basically, because the Quest is basically phone hardware under the hood. So I got a build of that going and showed it to a couple of the Oculus guys at one of the IndieCades, and that was kind of got things rolling. As far as the other platforms, Steam, we just released on Viveport. We've got a couple more coming pretty soon here that we haven't announced yet. Those, we've now got it set up so that we have a lot more tooling built around that. We have a friend of mine, Studio Farbridge, has actually done a lot of the work in terms of not just the porting, but creating the architecture that allows us to switch around between different VR architectures, because it actually is a very difficult thing to do right now. Because VR is so new, a lot of the different packages have a lot of proprietary stuff that don't play nicely. You can't have the Oculus plugins inside the Steam for various reasons, things like that. The porting and just the supporting the platform side of things takes a pretty decent chunk of work.
Are there plans to add more updates in the future?
I mean, we've got, like I mentioned, 7 more courses that are actively in active production, and we've actually got well over 100 ideas or course that I've actually we could do a course set here, or here's a cool mechanic. We've also got some licensed courses that we're going to start announcing before too long here. The plan is that this is going to be a game that we keep on updating basically for as long as it makes sense. But yeah, we're definitely going to be doing updates pretty regularly. Our goal is to get to the point where we can maybe do 1 new course a month. We're not quite there yet, although we did hit, basically in the last 3 months, we released 3 new courses. So we're kind of there, but we had a little bit of a backlog, so it was a bit of a cheat. But yeah, no, we want to get to that point where we're able to get into a nice sort of steady cadence with them, and be able to release new content pretty regularly.
Looking back now, what do you wish you could have done differently before the initial launch?
I think that a lot of the stuff just came down to being a solo dev, and also there were a lot of things that I didn't necessarily do because I had no idea that it was going to sort of take off like it did. And so there was a decent bit of code and architecture and just the ways that certain things have been done that made sense as a solo dev, that now we're having to go back and kind of okay, now that it's not just one person, we need to actually build this in a more robust way, or in a way that multiple people can be working on certain things at the same time. So we're kind of in the process of that now. It's kind of one of those things, though, that it's sort of yeah, it would have been nice if I had built things a little bit more robustly from the start. But at the same time, you kind of don't want to do that, because if you don't know you don't want to over-engineer something. The best way is often the simplest way, and I feel like that's kind of what we had done with that first version that I had made mostly solo.
What was the biggest lesson that you've learned from working on Walkabout Mini Golf?
Me is learning to run a games team. I mentioned earlier just how different it is because animation is surprisingly linear in terms of how you do stuff. You do storyboards, you do layout, you do animation, you do modeling assets. You could pretty much sort of like look at an animated movie and say like, okay, here's the story reel. We know it's going to change a little bit, but you could pretty much say like, here's all of our characters, here's our assets, here's our shots. And you could pretty much say like, okay, here's where we're going to be at in a year. And, are we going to hit our release date? Basically, it's very, very predictable in that sense, just because it's been around for a little bit longer. Whereas game design, especially VR, there's just a lot more unknowns. And a lot of it comes down to let's us get to a version that is like 90% functional as quickly as possible so we can start to see like, does this actually work? And just, on the tech side of things, sort of like sometimes you're like, oh yeah, that'll be a week. And then you get into the code and like, okay, that was a 6-month project that I had no idea that was lying under the hood. So I think that a lot of it is that it's like, it requires kind of a fundamental shift from what I'm used to in the animation world.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to new devs trying to get their first game made, or maybe in the middle of a game, trying to just finish it?
I think that probably the best bit of advice would be whatever you can do. Like to me, for a new game, 6 months is a really good sort of just like amount of time. Like if it's something that you could do well, if you can get something done in about 6 months, that is ideal, especially because VR is moving and changing so quickly. Until you've gotten a couple of games under your belt, doing stuff that's much larger than that tends to be very, very difficult because in a year, things are going to be different. What people are looking for is going to be very, very different. So I think that it's really, really important for that first game or two to try to get something still good, but try to set a scope and like what you're going to do in a way that is very quick to be able to iterate on and actually get something released. Because maybe one of the other big things that I've learned just from having released a couple of other smaller mobile games is that the game itself is a decent chunk of work, but the actual releasing of something and all of the technical things that you have to do to go from like, okay, this game is sort of like it's fully playable, it's basically polished, to actually releasing it, about 50% of the work that I found is just around the actual publishing of the game. And it's that, you've got to hit all these different sort of like requirements of the various different platforms. And, you've got to support this, these handful of controllers that you didn't expect that someone was going to have. Like there's just a lot of that stuff out there, which eats up a pretty massive amount of that back end time. And until you've released a game, you don't even know how much of that iceberg is underneath the surface.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Miles.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, consider clicking that subscribe or follow button. It's different on every platform. And if you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. Today's sponsor, Hoffman's Woodstuff, specializes in the design and fabrication of custom furniture made from reclaimed or sustainably sourced hardwoods. You can find them on Instagram at Hoffman's Woodstuffs, or you can go and check out their website, hoffmanswoodstuffs.net, by clicking that link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.